Tonight on Reporting Scotland, the Scottish Conservative leader calls for a UK-wide Brexit deal. Nicola Sturgeon says all parties should push to stay in the single market. A woman tells an inquiry how she was beaten by nuns and sexually abused by a priest while in this orphanage in Lanarkshire almost 50 years ago. The biggest fare increase in 5 years. Rail travellers are facing a 3.6% increase at peak times.
Well, it's quite a bit more than inflation and salaries are going up, so it will be hard for some families for sure.
I think it's disgraceful. If they're going to put the fares up, they should at least improve the service.
Also on the programme, a postcode lottery for parcel delivery in the north with claims it costs 30% more than the rest of Britain.
And join me here at Celtic Park, where a win, a draw or even a narrow defeat will be enough to see Brendan Rodgers' side safely into the Europa League.
Good evening. The Scottish Conservative leader, Ruth Davidson, has accused the First Minister of trying to weaponise Brexit to push for independence. But Nicola Sturgeon said the UK government had lost control of the negotiations and appealed for UK-wide agreement to stay in the European single market. Here's our political correspondent, Glenn Campbell.
Say it with a kiss.
Unveiling the design for her Christmas card, the First Minister offered no seasonal cheer to the UK government. Instead, she accused the Conservatives of making a mess of Brexit. In the Commons, the Brexit Secretary denied seeking special status for Northern Ireland and hit back at those who seized on that suggestion.
So when the First Minister of Wales complains about it, or the First Minister of Scotland says a reason to start banging the tattered drum of independence, or the Mayor of London says it justifies a hard border around the M25, I say they're making a foolish mistake.
At Holyrood, the Scottish Tory leader said the First Minister was wrong to expect anything other than a Brexit deal that applies to the whole UK.
Frankly, she should stop trying to leverage and weaponise Brexit as a tool for her independence obsession and make sure that we work together as one united kingdom to get the best deal for all of us.
The funny thing is, the First Minister hasn't been pushing the idea of independence today, even though that surely remains her ultimate goal. Instead, she's been arguing for a UK-wide response to Brexit that would see the whole country stay inside the European single market and inside the customs union. And even when the UK government said that will not happen, Nicola Sturgeon refused to accept that was the last word on the subject.
The UK government is not in control of this situation and will continue to be out of control until it gets into a position where it's arguing for something that makes coherent sense. You know, the UK is still trying to pretend it can have all things, have its cake and eat it. And I think yesterday the reality started to bite.
What happened yesterday was that Theresa May stopped short of agreeing a deal with EU Commission bosses that might allow Brexit talks to move to a new phase after the Democratic Unionist Party raised concerns about the Irish border.
How could there be a misunderstanding?
What's happened today is well illustrated by this TV exchange.
In the name of God, stop this nonsense, because it is just causing disaster and being led to disaster by people like David Jones.
I'll give you a chance to respond, Mr Jones.
Well, Mr Russell was probably the biggest impediment to the negotiations between the British government and the devolved administrations.
Fine without you,
and frankly,
for some, Brexit tensions are fraying tempers. Glenn Campbell, Reporting Scotland.
So, Ruth Davidson says she backs a UK-wide Brexit deal rather than specific arrangements for Northern Ireland. But does that view entirely support the approach by the Prime Minister? Well, I'm joined by our correspondent Nick Hartley, who's in Westminster. Nick, are all the Conservatives singing from the same hymn sheet here?
I think more of them are singing from the same hymn sheet tonight than perhaps appeared the case last night. Ruth Davidson's comments have the unanimous backing of her Scottish MPs here. They have the backing of many others in her party, many in other parties too. Add to the mix the fact that the DUP aren't budging, that the UK government says that differentiated arrangements on the single market aren't on the table, and I think many on that side will be happier. Not everything's rosy. The SNP continue to argue that the single market is the best way forward. Labour have opened the door to that coming back onto the table tonight, and I think the SNP now think they can argue that if that doesn't happen, differentiated arrangements for Scotland are only being blocked because of political will rather than any economic or constitutional reasons. That all said, the domestic issues aside, the biggest headache Theresa May still faces tonight is international. How she squares the interests of the DUP, of the Irish government, of her backbenchers, of many others, including the EU, to get a deal that would allow her and the EU to move on to the next phase of talks. She needs that to happen for her Brexit timetable to stay on course.
Nick Eardley, thank you very much. The ongoing inquiry into historical child abuse cases in Scotland has heard from a woman who claimed she was sexually abused by a priest and had her arm broken by a nun when she lived at Smileham Park Orphanage in Lanark nearly 50 years ago. Stephen Godden reports.
Leaving the child abuse inquiry, having travelled from Norway to tell her story, Theresa Tolmie McGrain was 6 years old when she went to Smileham Park along with her two sisters. The orphanage was run by an order of nuns. Earlier this year, she first told the BBC she had suffered and witnessed abuse there, allegations spanning more than a decade. The most shocking, repeated before the inquiry today, claims she had her arm broken by a nun who walked in while she was being sexually abused in the chapel by a visiting priest.
Instead of being angry at him, she got really angry at me, and she yanked me by the left arm so hard, flung me across the room and called me a whore and told me to get out of there.
Theresa McGrain told the inquiry she still bears physical as well as emotional scars from her time at Smileham. Chipped teeth from a metal fork being used to force feed her, misshapen fingers, the result of being beaten with a wooden hairbrush, and often a nun's cross, which she described as a source of terror for all the children. Speaking about it today brought it all back.
I could feel the carbolic soap in my mouth, I could feel how painful it was in my tailbone, I could feel the broken arm, I could feel that cross. To this day, the cross, this metal cross just slamming into my face. I could hear the knuckles on my head and I could feel you relive it.
The Daughters of Charity, the Catholic order who ran Smileham Park until it closed in 1981, have used the inquiry to apologise to anyone who suffered any form of abuse in their care. But today it heard that individual nuns spoken to about these specific allegations don't accept them.
I want them to take accountability for it, responsibility for it, and I'd like them to try to make amends. They did some bad things, just own up.
After leaving, Theresa graduated from university and moved to Norway. Yesterday, she went back to Smileham for the first time.
I'll not lie, it was tough to be there. Ogilvie House is still standing. The main building, at least the first part of it, is still standing. So many things happened there. But it was kind of an opportunity to put it behind me, I think. I laid some ghosts to rest.
As Theresa prepares to return to the country she now calls home, the inquiry before Lady Smith continues. Stephen Godden reporting Scotland, Edinburgh.
5 companies face prosecution over breaches of health and safety legislation following an outbreak of Legionnaire's disease in Edinburgh 5 years ago. 4 people died during the outbreak, but today's charges are unrelated to those deaths as the source of the disease was never identified. Lisa Summers reports.
The outbreak of Legionnaires in the summer of 2012 was thought to originate from a cluster of cooling towers. 92 cases were identified, 4 people died, and many spent time in intensive care. Despite a lengthy and complex investigation, the Crown Office said no one would face prosecution for the fatal outbreak because its source could not be identified. It angered many of those affected at the time.
The whole family wants answers, and I don't know why it's come back that no one's getting prosecuted.
We need somebody to stand up and say, look, this was our neglect, this was our fault, somebody is to blame. We didn't all just stand there and catch this.
Totally let down by everybody.
Now 5 companies at the centre of the outbreak face charges of health and safety breaches. North British Distillery and McFarland Smith Pharmaceuticals, based on Wheatfield Road, alongside Ashland Industries, Pera Services and Chemtech Consultancy, are all accused of exposing people to the risk of Legionella bacteria.
The charges relate to cleaning, maintenance and safety checks at a number of cooling towers located at both sites. The companies are accused of breaching health and safety legislation over a 4-year period in total. At Edinburgh Sheriff Court today, lawyers representing them pleaded not guilty to the charges.
The court heard that a trial could take up to 12 weeks. A further hearing will be held in Edinburgh next month. Lisa Summers reporting Scotland, Edinburgh.
Poorer patients often struggle to turn up for GP appointments, raising concerns they're missing out on vital health care. Well, that's one of the findings of a study of 500,000 Scots. It also found people are more likely to keep on-the-day appointments than if they have to wait a couple of days. Here's our health and social care correspondent, Shelley Joffrey.
Hi there.
We've got an appointment at 11:30.
Missed appointments are frustrating for busy doctors and for other patients who could take the slot.
They're wasting the NHS's time, especially the doctors, because the doctors are under a lot of pressure. And when they allocate you an appointment, you've got to stick to it.
So far this year, this Glasgow practice has had nearly 800 no-shows. 40 patients have missed more than 3 appointments.
There's a potential issue of kind of wasted resource there, but also there's the issue of trying to understand why someone has missed that appointment. Typical things might be transport issues is sometimes a barrier. There could be memory problems might be a case, or other health problems. Sometimes someone might make an appointment and then become more unwell and not be able to actually attend in person. But I can understand again, not everyone has mobile phones, not everyone has credit on their phones at all times, so there's other possible reasons why they can't get in touch with us.
Researchers from Glasgow University tracked the appointment histories of 500,000 patients and found the poorest are most likely to miss multiple appointments.
People that are more deprived tend to have more long-term conditions, and you start to get effects of having to attend a lot of different appointments. So actually having more diseases itself can lend itself to making your life more chaotic and making it hard to attend appointments when you actually have a lot of different appointments to attend.
In England, there's talk of fining patients who don't turn up. At this practice, they prefer a nudge by text.
They will get a text reminding them they've made an appointment, and they also get a text 24 hours ahead to remind them to attend. And if they suddenly become well again, I think it saves them having to phone us. They can text 12 o'clock at night, 2 o'clock in the morning, and it automatically removes it and frees up appointments for us. So yes, I would consider it very effective.
Rather than punish non-attenders, the study suggests a more positive approach. It found no-shows are less likely when patients are offered on-the-day appointments. Shelley Joffrey reporting Scotland, Glasgow.
Well, staying with health, Scotland's former chief medical officer said it wouldn't surprise him if the massaging of waiting time figures in the health service was common. Sir Harry Byrne's comments came after it emerged. Emergency waiting times at NHS Lothian's acute hospitals have been underreported. Speaking to MSP, Sir Harry, who's leading a review into NHS targets, said he had no factual insight into whether the practice was widespread.
What gets measured is what counts. And it's not right to put, people who work in the health service genuinely want to do a good job for their patients, and putting them in a position where they might have to behave dishonestly is not a good thing.
It's 17 minutes to 7, a reminder of tonight's top story. It's claimed parcel deliveries to the north and northeast can cost an average of 30% more than to the rest of Britain. And still to come, the Belgian side Anderlecht are tonight's opponents as Celtic aim to seal a place in the Europa League. Now, it's that time of year again for rail travellers. What's become an annual rise in fares. Passengers were told of the percentage rises earlier this year, but the reality of paying for the likes of season tickets comes into effect now. And for ScotRail passengers who are facing the largest fares rises in 5 years, it's an even bigger blow. Here's our transport correspondent, David Henderson.
Rail passengers on the move. So are their fares, which are set to rise 4 weeks from now. Few are enthusiastic about this change.
I think it's disgraceful. If they're going to put the fares up, they should at least improve the service.
Well, it's quite a bit more than inflation and salaries are going up, so it will be hard for some families for sure.
For peak time travellers on ScotRail services and season ticket holders, the cost of a journey will go up by 3.6% in the new year. For many off-peak journeys, the rise is a little less, 2.6%. So from January the 2nd, an annual season ticket between Glasgow and Edinburgh will cost almost £4,000, a rise of £136, while the price of a season ticket between Elgin and Inverness will reach £2,900. That's £100 more.
The vast majority of rail fares are regulated by the Scottish Government. So that regulation is designed to ensure that ScotRail doesn't charge passengers too much when they don't have much of an option except to take the train. But because those fares are pegged to inflation, their cost has risen in recent years much faster than wages.
All this after a difficult year for many passengers, with delays on the network and a patchy performance from ScotRail.
2018 has to be the year of delivery. We've got new trains, electrified lines, high-speed trains are being introduced. There'll be more seats, there'll be a better frequency of service. So passengers will want to see this all delivered next year so that they can see where some of that fare increase is actually going.
The Scottish Government says commuters here will see the lowest level of fare increases in the UK. But the rail union, the RMT, says it's a kick in the teeth for passengers. David Henderson, reporting Scotland.
And from rail to road, lane closures on the Queensferry crossing have been lifted a day ahead of schedule. Transport Scotland says significant progress has been made on snagging works. The remainder will be completed during the night for the rest of the week. It's claimed consumers in the north of Scotland are paying almost a third more on average for parcel deliveries than the rest of Britain. Citizens Advice Scotland says increased charges affect anyone living north of the Central Belt. Islanders are worst affected. Jackie O'Brien can tell us more.
Megan MacDonald lives in a cabin near Achmore in Wester Ross while saving for a permanent home. Every penny counts, and when faced with a £100 delivery charge for this new wood burner, she opted to have it sent free of charge to Edinburgh instead.
Edinburgh charges were actually free for the same item, and I just think having to pay every time you order something from one retailer is not fair for the Highlands and Islands. People up here rely on the internet to buy Christmas presents, things like that at this time of year especially. Next day delivery doesn't exist up here.
New research by Citizens Advice Scotland found that those living in the north of Scotland pay at least 30% more on average for delivery charges than consumers elsewhere. And the disparity between urban and rural customers is most marked for heavier items. It'll cost you 13% more to have a small parcel delivered to a community like this in the Highlands. That'll increase to 23% more for a larger package. But the heavier it gets, the higher the price difference. 4 times more costly in some cases.
There are different costs all over the UK for delivery, from one end of London to another. But parcel companies in most of the UK make a decision to flatten all their prices across certain areas. That just doesn't happen in northern Scotland, and that's what we'd like to see changed.
Parcel companies are being urged to consider more collaboration with the public sector to reduce operating costs in a bid to drive down delivery charges.
Some of these companies now are hostages to fortune insofar as they've said that they would normally be prepared to allow free deliveries just about in any area, but with these distances they're sort of coming a cropper, and plainly they're ending up losing margin if they don't charge in a little bit extra.
In a statement released this evening, retailers' representatives say they are committed to trying their best for shoppers throughout Scotland. The issue will be debated again by MSPs in Holyrood tomorrow. Jackie O'Brien, reporting Scotland, Wester Ross.
A senior figure in the oil giant Shell has told BBC Scotland he has no plans to sell any more assets in the North Sea, despite the Chancellor announcing measures to make the process easier. The company has just completed the sale of a package of fields for $3.8 billion. Our energy correspondent Kevin Keane reports.
It was the corporate deal of the year, and the dust has only just settled. This, the Everest field, one of a dozen or so assets which Shell has sold for almost $4 billion. In Aberdeen today, the man in charge of Shell's North Sea operation, who insists their sell-off is now complete.
We have, in the last year, conducted quite a significant divestment of a package of assets. It's been done very intentionally and very clearly with a strategic intent to focus on our core business. So we today have a good, strong core piece of business. It's about 150,000 barrels a day, so still a very significant producer in the basin. And that is the portfolio we will take forward and intend to invest in over the coming years.
The industry has been desperate for investment since the oil price crashed, and much of it has stalled. But in last month's budget, the Chancellor announced decommissioning tax changes to stimulate sales.
But that won't affect you, is that what you're saying, because you're committed for the long term to what you have in your current portfolio?
I think it's going to help the basin immensely. I think there are still assets that may not attract investment from certain companies.
Your assets.
Who may not want to hold them for the long term and want to move them on. I now have the portfolio today in the UK that we set out to achieve at the beginning of the year, and that's the one I intend to invest in.
That stability will be welcome to the 1,500 people who work for Shell in Aberdeen and the North Sea. Around 700 jobs have been lost in the past 3 years. Kevin Keane reporting, Scotland, Aberdeen.
Well, let's turn our attentions to sport now, and it's a big night for Celtic. Although their hopes of Champions League progression have long since gone, they can still make it into the knockout stage of the Europa League. They're at home to Anderlecht this evening and can even afford to lose, as David Curry reports.
In Glasgow, it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas, and for Celtic supporters, the signs are favourable that they'll be enjoying European football in the new year. Even though only the top 2 teams in each Champions League group stay in the competition, Group B's superclubs PSG and Bayern Munich will claim those spots. But there's a consolation of a place in the first knockout stage of the Europa League for teams finishing third. Celtic will claim that place if they avoid losing by 3 goals this evening. That's because they beat the Belgian champions 3-0 in Brussels a couple of months back.
I think when the draw was made, everybody sort of looked at the 2 Anderlecht games as being the sort of deciding ones if we were going to go and progress into European football after Christmas. So we've put ourselves in a great position to do that.
Anderlecht supporters, though, are doing some Christmas dreaming of their own. How do you rate Anderlecht's chances this evening?
Well, let's say 50-50.
Very difficult, but everything is going to be all right.
Miracles happen around Christmas, and it's Christmas time, so we hope of a miracle.
The question is, will there be European football for Celtic after Christmas?
Yes, there will be. Oh, definitely. If they can't beat Anderlecht tonight, they should chuck it.
David Curry, reporting Scotland, Glasgow.
Santa. Well, our senior football reporter Chris McLaughlin is at Celtic Park for us, and Celtic hope to be celebrating in a few hours' time, Chris.
Yeah, no elf jokes, Jackie. Absolutely. It's basically a 90-minute fight for Europa League football. That and the chance for Celtic to end the campaign on a high. Now, my usual Champions League sidekick is beside me, the former Celtic striker Scott McDonald. Scott, it was 3-0 in Belgium to Celtic back in September. We can't really see a reverse of that scoreline tonight, can we?
No, I certainly can't. I fully expect Celtic to score, and you would imagine 1 goal will be more than sufficient to see them in Europe, past Christmas. But if Anderlecht are to score that first goal, which we've seen in previous ties at Celtic Park, can get a bit shaky. So hopefully Celtic start on the front foot like they have been in Europe, at home games, and they can get that lead and get their head in front.
Anderlecht have not won a game in this group. They've not won on the road in Champions League duty since 2005, but the pressure's kind of off them this evening, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a nothing to lose scenario for them, and if you look at Celtic's form, which is surprising, is that they've only won once in their last 9 home games in the Champions League, so Celtic's form hasn't been great at home either, so it makes for an intriguing tie, but again, I think Celtic will have too much for them tonight.
A fairly predictable Celtic lineup. The big news, I suppose, is that Moussa Dembele's fit.
Yeah, massive. That's massive for Celtic. I think Brendan Rodgers, trusts him more than the other strikers in the big games, and that's been proven over the period he's been here.
And of course, for Brendan Rodgers, it's the chance for him to get his first Champions League win at home.
Yeah, and that would be great for the club as well, especially moving into the Europa League. It would give them some confidence, hopefully, going into that, and they can progress in that tournament also.
Scott, thank you very much indeed for now. Now, as ever, the game is a sellout, but we've got it covered. It is live on BBC Radio Scotland. Full comprehensive coverage also on the BBC Sport Scotland website. Jackie.
Thank you very much, Chris. Well, let's get the weather forecast now from Christopher.
Jackie, thank you. Hello there, good evening to you. Well, this evening and tonight, really quite windy at times, but fairly mild. And whilst it will be dry for most of us, there is some rain around, mainly in the northwest. The wet weather across eastern Aberdeenshire at the moment clears, and the rain holding on across further far north in the Northern Isles. But you'll see for most of us, actually, fairly dry and actually quite mild. 7-8 Celsius in towns and cities, but it will be windy. Now, tomorrow gets off to a dry start for many, but the rain in the west quickly edges its way eastwards and crosses the country through the course of the day. So a spell of wet weather for many of us on and off through the course of Wednesday, and it will be windy. Strong to gale force at times around the Solway coast and up through the Minches. Even inland, we'll see some strong winds at times, so a cloudy, wet, windy day, but mild, 10, 11, maybe 12 Celsius, and certainly to the north and east of the Cairngorms National Park, the cloud likely to thin and break, some hazy brightness here. Towards areas further west, though, fairly thick cloud, outbreaks of rain, and again, those winds, they really will be quite strong. Now, the rest of the afternoon into the evening and overnight, and the wet, windy weather continues. In fact, the rain will be quite heavy. But actually, it's the wind that is of concern as we go through towards Thursday. And we have a Met Office yellow be aware warning in force because there's a deep area of low pressure approaching. And the Met Office has named it Storm Caroline. It's our third named storm of the autumn-winter, and it's likely to give winds up to around storm force strength for areas north of the central lowlands. But the latest indications is that even through parts of the central belt, we could see some gale or severe gale force winds at times, sort of early afternoon. Likely to give some disruption to travel, perhaps some interruptions to power supply too. Now, that storm pulls away as we go through towards Friday, opening the floodgates to really cold Arctic air. So after that wet and windy spell on Thursday, later Thursday into Friday, very wintry with some snow showers, perhaps even to low levels. That's the forecast for now.
How can you open the floodgates to air?
You can.
Thank you, Christopher. Now, a reminder of tonight's main news. The Scottish Conservative leader, Ruth Davidson, has accused the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, of trying to weaponise Brexit to push for independence. But Ms Sturgeon said the UK government had lost control of the negotiations. And that's Reporting Scotland. From all of us on the team, enjoy the rest of your evening. Goodbye.